as a whole, what we are doing with the e-collar generally falls under the category of what we call colloquially escape avoidance training, which is really another way of saying negative reinforcement and positive punishment. For those of you who are not super familiar with operant conditioning, just very briefly, all negative reinforcement means, and we'll get into this in much more detail, is a behavior becomes reinforced, right? So behavior is going to happen more because that behavior either makes something unpleasant go away or avoids it. And that's what reinforces the behavior. And then positive punishment very simply just means a behavior is going to become less likely because that behavior results in an unpleasant consequence occurring, in a nutshell. And that's the bulk of what we're doing with our e-collar. So it's escape and it's avoidance. Escape meaning make the pressure go away. Avoidance, of course, meaning avoid feeling the pressure to begin with. So the negative reinforcement component of this is the trickier part for a lot of people to grasp. And it's where we spend the bulk of our time with the e-collar, particularly when we're using it for obedience training, which is what a lot of our e-collar use is for. It's for obedience training. So almost everything we do in our obedience training falls under the category of negative reinforcement. And negative reinforcement is one of the most powerful forms of learning out there. It affects almost everything that we do with dogs. And it's one of the most powerful ways to create reliability in our obedience. So I believe that positive reinforcement is really the best way to teach a new skill, but negative reinforcement is the best way to make that skill reliable, to make that skill durable and resistant to extinction. And there's a story that often goes along with the understanding of why negative reinforcement is so powerful. So a man goes into a psychiatrist's office, and he sits down with the doctor and sits down on the little bench and happens to sit on his hands, puts his hands underneath his butt. And so they're talking for a while, and he's talking about his past and all that stuff that we do at psychiatrist's office. And eventually the doctor says to him, you know, sir, this is all very interesting, but I must ask you one thing. Why are you sitting on your hands? And the guy says, oh, well, it keeps the lions away. And the doctor says, okay, but you do know that there's no lions in Buffalo, right? And the guy says, I know, it works. The point being, as long as he believes that if he did not sit on his hands, lions would come, every single time he sits on his hands, that behavior is being reinforced. So the behavior becomes self-reinforcing. That's the power of negative reinforcement. That's why it's so resistant to extinction. If we're relying on positive reinforcement to motivate behavior, as soon as you stop using treats, as soon as you stop reinforcing, the dog is aware of that. But once the dog learns to avoid a negative reinforcement, if you decided last week that you're never going to press the button on the e-collar again, the dog doesn't know that. Because every time they do the behavior, they believe they avoided something that would have happened, right? So it creates very strong behavior that lasts. And that's why it's important to understand how negative reinforcement works and why it works. And we're going to spend a lot of time on that throughout this week.